Hey, everybody, this is Jake Wynn, public historian, and I am here with a colleague of mine that I've known for several years now and gotten to work a little bit with over the years, Mitch Troutman. Welcome to our YouTube channel. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we are going to be doing some discussing today about Mitch's wonderful book, which you should go out and get a copy of, and there'll be a information about that in just below in the description about more about the book. But the goal here is to add some more conversations to this YouTube channel. So more interviews, more conversations that, Mitch and I might have if we go out to grab a coffee or a beer. But this time we're just sharing it with all of you guys out there. So definitely, if you are enjoying these conversations, want to hear more of them, go ahead and like, subscribe, and leave some comments as well. And yeah, really excited to chat with Mitch about your book. But for the audience out there, Mitch, would you mind describing your background, your story, and what's your tell us your coal region background?
Okay, sure. I grew up in Northumberland County, which is, I usually tell people near Centralia if they don't know where I'm talking about, and then they don't know what that is, and I describe the town that's on fire. Oh yeah, that. Um, and everybody tried to go there when they were in college or something. Um, but yeah, so I grew up in like an area that's like kind of half farm, half coal field at the bottom of the coal region, so opposite of Scranton and all that. Um, And what's my background? I don't know. I've done all sorts of things. I mean, I've been like involved in, for lack of a better word, like activism and like community organizing for a long
Hmm.
time. Um, and and I was always interested in media, and I care a lot about where I'm from. I currently live in Pittsburgh, but I have a lot of ties back home, and I've lived there, off and on. Um, and And yeah, and I was like living in Trevorton, one of these coal towns, and running a
Hmm.
blog about local things and just kind of like reflecting the absurdity of local life in the coal region back to people, um, which, yeah, which was like well received and fun to do.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the stories I was doing was on the bootleg miners because I grew up around, like, in school, people would come wearing their bootleg coal shirts that they got from the annual bootleggers picnic, you know?
Yeah.
And it was like a certain crowd, certain families and stuff. My family wasn't involved in it. But then eventually I started writing a book about it because there was no book about it. And I learned that my
Hmm.
family was involved and so was everybody else's, basically.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that when I was getting into it.
Yeah, so where did your interest in, this history, this story really develop? Where was this something that you've always kind of been aware of these stories since, you were a kid growing up, or is this something more recent for you that you dove into? What got you interested in these stories?
Yeah. I mean, I care a lot about history and local history, and I've always been reading different things about it. And there's a book, Face of Decline, by
Hmm.
Thomas Dublin, but it kind of goes through like the whole coal region history in a pretty comprehensive way that other books didn't. And there's like a small section on bootlegging that was like a couple pages,
Yeah.
and then I hadn't read that before. Like I said, I only knew like the people I grew up with that, they had family mines that they ran. And especially being in the lower anthracite, I didn't really even have a concept that coal companies were any bigger than families anyway, per se.
Hmm.
Um, and when I read that little bit of history, though, I was like, whoa, there's some wild stuff that went on here, and also where I'm from is very like Pennsylvania Dutch, very like, oh yeah, not much goes on around here, the corn's doing all right this year. I saw some more birds than usual, like whatever.
Yeah.
And then just learning that people fought the cops,
Yeah.
did all this stuff, like operated entirely outside of like the legal economy for a good chunk of time, was really wild. And then just like when I started researching more, I just kept finding more wild stories, and that's what like kept me going through the whole thing there'd just always be another crazy story or entertaining story, though most of them um, weren't told to me like firsthand because the people who did these things were passed away by the time I was looking into it, and a lot of the memory of it was gone. Of course, the people who still mine the coal, they're like highly skilled, and like it's like clearly like a thing you learn from working with
Mhm.
somebody else for years, you know. And so that was like that's continuous lineage. But um, yeah, actually though, do you have any ties to it? Because you're from
Mhm.
Wiccanisco, right? And at one
Yeah.
point, that was all bootleggers.
Yeah, so, family is from, both Wiccanisco and Williamstown. I grew up in Williamstown, but right on the border with Wiccanisco, and, yeah, so my family's tied up in this as well. I a few years ago got a book. So the mining history interest is like generational for me. So my great grandfather, who he's a veteran, served in World War II. His brothers all served in World War II, and some of them worked as coal miners. But my great grandfather, had this huge interest in the local mining history and collected photos. And I'd always heard about this, but kind of came to it independently. I didn't have access to any of the things he researched. But a few years ago, my great uncle George passed away, and he had all of those things, and it made its way back to me. And it was just amazing to find that I had collected some of the same things that he had collected, and the interest was very similar. And I bring that up because one of the things that was in that booklet was a photograph of my great grandfather in their little bootleg hole that they had on Big Lick Mountain in 1940. So right before he went off to World War II, he's at this little 3-person mining operation that he worked in. So yeah, a direct family tie to the story that you tell in the book.
That's so cool to have a photo. Since this book came out, people, when I have an event or something, people come out and they bring
Mhm.
me photos and stuff, you know. But a lot of it's, you know, newspaper clippings or stuff from later on, because bootlegging happened later on, like beyond the period I cover in the book. But yeah, I probably told you this before, but the way I found out that my family was involved, I had asked my pappy, my grandfather, like a couple of times about it, and didn't have much to say. He just talked about this one time where he worked in a independent mine, but he had a mule and his name was Jack. And that, like, I don't know, it's just like a bar story, you know. I never knew if it was. I knew he worked in the mine,
Mhm.
and that it's currently like I-81 like goes over where the entrance was,
Oh,
you
wow.
know. Um but like when I mean for the sake of those listening or watching, like the independence is like a short word for the people who were using bootleg mining skills legally. You know, they were
Yeah.
leasing the land in some way. Whereas bootlegging is talking about them doing it illegally, like taking over company property or just they're going through their backyard or basement or something too. Um, but anyway, I showed him some photos, and one of the like while I was doing my research, and one of the photos I found was a photo of the governor at the time, Governor Earl, visiting the bootleg miners in 1936. He did a little tour, and I showed it to my pappy, and he gets mad. He's like, "That guy ain't no miner." Da, 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 da. And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the governor, you know." And he's like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, your uncle Earl, or your well, his brother Merle, he was like my brother Merle ran the winch. I'm like, what winch? It's at the family mine, you know, at the bootleg mine. Um, and he didn't
Wow.
have too many more details to add. It seemed kind of hazy, you know. And he was towards the end of his life at that point. But that's how I pinned that down. And I mean, I wish I could have seen a photo, you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's
That's so
um,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah. So for yeah, viewers, listeners out there, I think most people in northeastern Pennsylvania that have some roots in the region will probably know what we're talking about when we're talking about bootleg mining. I would say for those that may be listening outside of the region or relative newcomers, they hear bootlegging and they're probably thinking, making liquor. So I guess it would be good to kind of define that term. So for
Mhm.
you, how do you find, and you kind of already made a distinction between independent mining and bootlegging, but could you describe what bootleg mining is?
Sure. I mean, when you get into the weeds with history, things always get a little blurry. Sometimes
Hmm.
people just called themselves independents because they wanted respect. It
Yeah.
didn't matter if it was illegal. But bootleg mining, which I should say, it got its name because it was prohibition. So
Hmm.
anything that was considered illicit was just called bootleg. If you bought like, I don't know, some ice cream from a guy who wasn't paying his taxes, they might call that bootleg ice cream or something. There was like a whole bootleg milk thing going on
Hmm.
around this time. So that's how bootleg coal gets its name. Um, but it's just when the miners were getting coal on their own from company grounds, or just on some other property that they could get into where they weren't legally entitled to be there, or maybe legally entitled to mine it.
Hmm.
Um, and for most of it, we're talking about actual mines that people sunk on company ground, usually at a company they had worked at until they got laid off.
Hmm.
They would go in there and mine it, but also like during the Great Depression is like the time period we're talking about. They were getting it any way they could. They would go
Hmm.
into strip mines at night, take it, go into strip mines at night and run the machines. I've seen reports of. Um, they would like climb up on the train cars, especially kids climb up on the train cars and just push as much off as you could.
Hmm.
And then if you're selling it, that's bootleg coal. If you're just taking it home, well, that's just going to get some coal, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
and like I said, people the stories are crazy. People would bootleg mining, like bootleg from their basement, start a tunnel. And there's even stories still about someone in Shamokin or whatever who like got some of their foundation rebuilt and found an entrance to a bootleg shaft that had been sealed over in there.
It's
Um,
wild.
so yeah, bootleg coal is just illegally gotten coal. And then I guess with the understanding that's being sold. Yeah.
Yeah. So what were this is a time period that's gotten increasingly interesting to me, I think in part because we're 100 years out from it now. Kind of this period where your book begins, kind of in 1925. And I'm fascinated by the economic conditions that are taking hold in that time period that are gonna proliferate and get worse during the Great Depression. But could you kind of describe what's going on in the region in the 1920s and the 1930s that makes bootleg mining almost inevitable?
Yeah. I mean, interest for other research that I'm doing on a different topic right now. I'm trying to learn more about the 20s, and so I need to listen to the rest of your Maroons episode, um, because I have a grasp on the 30s, and the 20s are like so
Mm,
different in some way. I don't quite understand. But
yeah.
but I mean, one thing is that like the phrase "roaring 20s" that was so popular for a long time with historians, like, is talking kind of about New York and Chicago in
Hmm.
like 1928. 1929 is really specific. But for coal miners all over, it was pretty bad. For farmers, it was pretty bad. Like the 20s was like an unstable time.
Hmm.
And we think back to the Great Depression, but before the Great Depression, depressions were like fairly common. You know, there's a big one after World War One, but I think there's another one later in the 20s too. Um, but let's just say that like the bootlegging itself, the taking of the coal and selling it,
Hmm.
goes back as far as I can figure out.
Hmm.
Probably back to Wales, and like the
Yeah.
earliest miners who came over to the U.S. And the idea that like all property is discreetly owned by someone and you won't cross those lines was like people knew that's what the law was, but there was custom too. And
Yeah.
so like from the earliest mines anywhere in the world, you're producing tailings piles, you're producing like lesser quality of the stuff that you want, whether it's coal or iron or ore or whatever.
Hmm.
And people felt entitled to that because they're the ones who dug it out of the ground. Um, so as far back as I can figure out, people in the anthracite were picking coal off the coal banks, for their own use, especially like kids and elderly people. I'll get to back to the economic conditions, I promise. Um, but in terms of like why was it somewhat inevitable, is
Hmm.
because people already had this attitude is
Yeah.
is like, well, if I have the knowledge and I have the tools and the stuff is here and like no one else is helping me out, like I'm gonna help myself, you know?
Hmm.
And so people like in the strike of 1902 already. There's like in newspapers, people are bootlegging during the strike
Yeah.
uh, to heat their homes, to help pay off the tab at the store, things like that. But then also selling it because whenever there was a coal strike, it was like the whole northeast section of the country was without coal for heat.
Yeah.
So there was always a market. Um, and then 1925, there's a big strike called the Long Strike. Lasts about 6 months, goes through the winter because if you're a miner, the best time and your coal is used for heating, the best time to strike when you have the most leverage is in the winter.
Hmm.
Um, and so people were, to survive that strike, people were bootlegging coal. Um, and then it goes away again because like work in the collieries, especially with the unions, is much better. You know, you get paid better, you have more protections. Um, yeah, and so it goes away again after the long strike is over. But then as the Great Depression creeps in, um, people people like the collieries shut down, and then people start bootlegging again.
Hmm.
And yeah, okay, so like the conditions in the 1930s then, so the depression hits, um, coal's still needed, but the companies are like kind of playing a weird game where they own the railroads and the companies, even though there's like 10 large anthracite companies, but
Hmm.
they're all essentially owned by the same people through a complicated web of who's invested in who, you know?
Hmm.
Um, but those companies also, I shouldn't say those companies, the same owners also own the railroads. And so they're trying to shift their profits into the railroads and shut down collieries and modernize as much as they can. So this
Hmm.
is a little bit regardless of the Great Depression. I think the thing the Great Depression especially adds to it is that you can't just go down to Philly and go work and steal,
Yeah.
because those people are out of work too,
Yeah.
and so there's nowhere else to go. Um, and so as they're shutting down more collieries and building a few new ones that are like more mechanized, more centralized, and especially as they're getting into strip mining, more and more people are out of work and take to bootlegging. And then this happens all over the coal region. But then once
Mhm.
there's like a critical mass of people is when it starts happening in broad daylight in the lower coal region and becomes its whole own industry where there's not
Yeah.
not much else going on. Um, and again, it's the depression for everyone else, everywhere else too. And so
Hmm.
those miners can get that coal down to Baltimore, down to Philly, all the way up Boston, whatever, and find people will like happily pay less, you know,
Yeah.
happily pay less. And, then, but it's like questionable, what quality did the bootleg of coal did the bootleg miners produce, things like that. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that kind of covers it. I mean, like the yeah, go ahead. And
Yeah.
by
This
the
is
way,
gonna.
you know a lot about this too, so feel free to add anything that you feel like, oh, what about that? Go ahead.
You hit on everything that I wanted that I would be like, those conditions that kind of what is going on in the region at this time. And this is why it's interesting to me at the moment. Because I always love this
Mhm,
relevance piece. I love the stories of kind of like, oh, something happening in 2026 makes me think differently about this event that occurred 100 years ago. And that is automation
mhm,
and mechanization and using technology, and technology ultimately replacing workers. And we're kind of in a cycle of that going on right now in America that's kind of like out of control. And especially in northeastern Pennsylvania along that I-81 corridor where, you know, all of these warehouses and distribution has become a huge industry, one of the largest employers. And suddenly now you have big companies that are like, oh, we're going to replace all of these workers with AI and robots. And
mhm,
suddenly it's like, oh, wow, this is actually very similar to what happened in the region in the 1920s and 1930s when the coal companies are centralizing operations. They're shutting down all of the different collieries around the region and they're centralizing production and the sorting and cleaning, and St. Nicholas breaker opens and it's everything is being funneled there. And so that means you don't need all of these other breakers everywhere, that we're employing people in these little villages, and it makes those villages essentially economically pointless. What's the reason that you had people living there? It was for work in this one very specific place. And yeah, I feel that like it really resonates now in a way that it didn't to me maybe even 5 years ago, where it's
Mm.
like, oh, this is also why people get so angry. And I think that is a huge part of your research, as well as that rebellion, that revolt against some of those forces, the corporate forces, the against a little bit of against the government as well. Can you talk a little bit about that anger and how the people living, the working class people in the lower anthracite, respond to some of these economic forces?
Yeah. Yeah, it's new to me that some of those warehouses on I-81 are closing, which is wild because that is where most people work. You know, a lot of
Yep.
people I grew up with commute an hour to go work at the Walmart distribution center, which is still open, but there's other ones. Um, yeah, and it's, you know, there another similarity too is that it like the managers of the collieries and stuff like that, they also
Hmm.
lived there. A lot of them worked
Yeah.
their way up, you know, through things. And so even though they were the ones implementing a lot of stuff people didn't like, they still knew people.
Yeah.
But the owners didn't live there and never went there, you know?
Right.
And so making these decisions was done in a New York boardroom, which is probably about the same for Big Lots or whoever, you
Yeah.
know? Um and so, yeah, people felt really, I mean, totally betrayed. Um, I I don't know how I don't know what degree people were ever in love with the coal companies in the first place,
Yeah.
you know. But the towns had been built by the coal companies. People brought there. People lived there multiple generations. Um, Thanks to the union, things got a lot better. By this time, we're
Hmm.
not talking about company towns anymore, you know. But people knew that history. Um, and just yeah, just they felt betrayed, but they also knew there was a market for coal, you
Yeah.
know? But the problem is with coal is like if you produce twice as much, then the price goes down. So the
Hmm.
companies wanted to like keep it tight with how much they were producing, you
Yeah.
know? But people, you know, people knew, oh, the price is high. We could just be selling coal. Why did you close the place down in my town? You know?
Yeah.
And especially it wasn't single employers. There was also a lot of silk and textile mills around
Yeah.
who were also having their own turbulence through this time. Um, but yeah, I wish I I should have like grabbed a quote to read off or something for this because there's some great quotes that I put in the book. Um, but yeah, there was a lot of anger. I
Hmm.
mean, a rough quote I remember from the book is uh, the Reading anthracite didn't put that coal there. God put that coal there, and I'm going to mine it. You know,
Yeah.
um, and they knew that it was like a financial Wall Street decision that
Hmm.
costs whole towns their livelihoods. Um, and there was so much bitterness. Again, there was already so much bitterness because of the strikes. The strikes would be fought over like such tiny things sometimes that
Hmm.
the companies just refused to budge on, even though I mean, we're talking JP Morgan. I should have said earlier, like when you connect all the webs of investors, it ends at
Yeah.
JP Morgan. Um, and yeah, there's just a lot of resentment, a lot of bitterness and sense of betrayal. And that really fueled the whole thing. Uh,
Hmm.
Unfortunately, like I've worked at some warehouses. That's not really you can't just go warehouse your own products,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, in you know in some like revenge against Big Lots closing, but yeah, but yeah, yeah. I mean, I think a lot about like the ties between things between now and then, but I purposely wrote the book in like an open-ended way where I wanted people to draw their own conclusions because the
Yeah.
conclusions aren't like one for one because well, I guess because coal mining is so specifically skilled and
Yeah.
because the coal you can't move the coal to another state, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's there whether the company's mining it or not, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, basically the coal region's been trying to play catch up ever since this time period, and that's how we got the warehouses in the first place. And like actually another comparison to the coal region is that the warehouses all came with lots of promises, you know.
Yeah.
We're going to employ 1,000 people. Okay, well it only ended up being 500. um,
Hmm.
we're not going to pay taxes. That's the big one. We're not going to pay any taxes. And oh, our 10-year tax thing is up. Like, oh, we're out of here, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so it's similar in that way. And now the coal region, like so many other places, is chasing data centers. Um,
Yeah.
there's I mean, this is not anyone's local's decision, but there's like talk of opening up an ice detention center in Schuylkill County.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think you said something really important there about it's not necessarily one to one. You can't make that direct comparison. And actually think that's a really, really good point when thinking about the relevance of these historical examples to our own time, that there is never going to be a perfect historical example,
Yeah,
that you're going to
yeah.
pull from. It's always going to be pulling bits and pieces because our own time period is its own unique set of circumstances. I do think it's interesting too that you brought up the data centers, because what's interesting about the data centers is that that's what's fueling the automation that is going to replace
Mhm.
all of those warehouse jobs. So it's just like, they're promising construction jobs, and that there's going to be employment, and that there's going to be, taxes will be paid, or maybe not, that there's going to be something there to support the local community, when in reality, if you map this out 10 years down the road, it's like this is almost entirely a negative. It's going to employ like 5 people, and
Yeah.
it's going to use up all the water, and it's going to use up all the electricity, and make the price of electricity go higher. And then also it's giving these companies the ability to cut their workforce, because they can get robotics to do all of that work that was being done by human beings before.
Yeah, and they'll have local construction crews pour the concrete pad and make the roof, but that's it. Then it's
Yep.
gonna be specialized crews who travel around doing this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a few phrases for it. One's like smokestack chasing, you know?
Mm,
We want our town to have the factory. Actually, that same book that I said about Face of Decline talks a lot about that later on
yeah.
in the coal region, and it would be really wild because today it's like states and regions competing with each other, but there was
Mm,
a time period where it was like town by town competing with each other to see who
mm,
would get the next textile mill to be open, you know, and it would just be just like a bidding war, but what you're bidding is just what you're willing to give up.
yeah.
You know?
Yep. Yep.
I
And in
mean,
the end,
that's always like a frustrating thing about being from the coal region. Maybe it's Pennsylvania. Maybe it's just how everybody feels everywhere, and it's not local at all. I don't know, but it always feels like this, like, we'll settle for nothing. You know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's always that kind of, and I think it goes back to the region's very origins. It's like when the reason that you're the reason for the name of this place, the coal region, it's an industry, it's a whole community or network of communities built on one thing. And I mean, that's not just a northeastern Pennsylvania story. That's, an Appalachia story, going all the way down into, western Pennsylvania where you're at, and down into West Virginia and Kentucky. And, it's something that I've found really just fascinating, is just the how closely the experience of what we grew up with, and the communities that we grew up in, and their economic situation, and the culture of the place maps so well to places in southern West Virginia, or Kentucky, where it's like the accent is different, but there's so many similarities between our communities and their communities. And there's some solidarity in that. And I also see it too in other communities, in, industrial towns that have lost their industry, in places like Ohio or Indiana, Michigan. And I think that, yeah, it's like we're all these little communities kind of struggling for a future. It's like, what's the next step here? And it's kind of been that way for like 100 years now, even longer, about what's gonna be next. What's the thing that's gonna move us forward?
yeah, I have some friends who have a really cool project down in Matewan. You maybe
Mm,
heard of it? The Mine Wars Museum.
yes, I want to
Um,
get there. I'm
yeah,
so they have a great online presence. They do a great job.
they're doing amazing work with with like such a small, I don't know, in such a small area, you know?
Hmm.
Um, It's really cool. You know, there was like a 15-year period where like a series of strikes got extremely heated and turned into warfare. I
Mhm.
think it was the Army or maybe it was the Air Force came in. I don't know their history that well,
Yeah.
but they've done a really great job of opening a museum about that and really promoting that. I think it was banned from like West Virginia textbooks for a long time, like the history of what
Mhm.
happened there.
Yeah.
And now they have classrooms coming through all the time, sharing that history. And it's really great what they do. Though I will say the anthracite is like I don't know any other place that like loves its own history more than the anthracite region. And
Yeah.
while we don't have like a museum dedicated to conflict specifically, we do have a lot of coal museums, all of which are very uh adamant of like, yeah, this is for like the common people of this
Mhm.
region, you know? Um
Yeah, there's so much passion for the local history in the coal region. I was just talking about this with David Fleming, the author of Breaker Boys, about the Pottsville Maroons in the 1925 NFL championship, and he talked about it both during the podcast episode and also before and afterwards about that he had never experienced a community like ours anywhere else. He's like,
yeah.
people felt ownership of this story and they looked at him as an outsider for a bit. And then they realized, like, oh, he's going to do it right. He's talking to the right people. And then it was like all in on the back, on the supporting it. And then when the book came out, he said he had some of his craziest book signings, the most people, in the Fairlane Village Mall. It's like
Mhm.
3 hours of signing books. It was crazy. And yeah, no, it comes through. Maybe it's a little bit of where my interest in this came from. I don't know if you feel that same way.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, it's like a subject like anybody in any coal town will talk about. That and gardening. People love talking about their gardens too.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and I mean, my book came out like maybe 5-ish years ago now. And I mean, I'm still well, they just gave me the Anthracite History Award. I'm not sure the exact phrasing on the award's name.
Yeah.
Which is a surprise to me because I thought books get award if a book is gonna get an award, it happens in the first year, you know? Um,
Hmm.
but, um, but as part of Anthracite History Month, which is also crazy to me that they do like 2 dozen events every January, some of which are, book talks and things like this. I mean, you just
Hmm.
you just did one, yeah? Did you
Yep,
do it already?
I did my first one in the middle of the month of January. Yeah, it's the first time I've
How
ever
was it?
participated. It was great. It was great. Yep, we were yeah, there in the Alvernia campus in downtown Pottsville, and it was great turnout. And yeah, I'm looking forward to participating and potentially helping organize things a bit on the southern end of the region, which beforehand we were talking about this a little bit at the event. It started out as a northern fields, the
Mhm.
northern region kind of event, and now has kind of spread southward. And I would love to be part of helping to further that. So yeah,
Yeah,
excited about that, and very
that
excited.
would
I
be
wish I could
great.
be for your presentation as well.
Yeah, that would be great if you got involved in that way. And it would be great to bring it down farther. I feel like there's some like titans of coal region history who live up in the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area, and
Yep.
then in the southern counties, I feel like we have just less infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like when my book came out, I set up a book tour, but that like meant like talking people into the idea of a book event in the first place.
Hmm.
So I did like a fire hall, I did a bar, some historical societies, things like that. I did one just like outside in the park,
That's
um,
amazing.
and it was, yeah, it was amazing. But also there wasn't a regular path towards doing it. You know,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah, it's I feel like and that's what I love about being in this community that we're a part of, is that there are some really passionate people. And I feel like very passionate kind of younger people too. I always
Hmm.
hear I used to work in a museum that did Civil War history, and I was working there when I was like 19 years old. And I would hear from people all the time. They'd walk in, they'd be like, look, a young person that cares about history. And I'd be like, well, there's a lot more of us. And I do feel like there's just such a great group of younger people who have taken up this interest, whether we live there or we moved on. We feel like
Mhm.
our roots
Yep.
are tied there, and we want to tell those stories because they're really important national stories. Like your book
Mhm.
fits into, gives us a better understanding of a time period where you said, roaring 20s really only exists in the big cities like Chicago and New York. For communities, industrial communities like those you find in northeastern Pennsylvania, that's not the case. It is a struggle, a life or death struggle as you get into the 1930s. These are stories that need to be told, and we're going to tell them.
Yeah, and in terms of anthracite, I mean, up until natural gas heating, like that was always national news.
Yep.
It's crazy the number of like Harper's, or is it Harper's? Harper's does the illustrated like illustrations
Hmm.
from like the late 1800s and stuff like that
Yeah.
of the anthracite region. Like, wow, people were really like, what the hell's going on out there? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
Um,
like a Wild West town, but like 100 miles from Philadelphia.
yes. Yes, exactly. Just sort of on that subject, I just want
Mhm.
to say, or maybe brag, that lately, like the place my book has been selling best is the Troutman's Meat Market at the
Amazing.
at the Gratz auction, like sort of like a farmers market thing.
Oh yeah,
They've been like happy to sell it alongside their meat selection,
that's
and
incredible.
it's just been very popular there, which is great.
Yeah,
Because
every
again, we also don't have. I don't. I don't want to say there's no bookstore in Northumberland County, but there might not be a bookstore in Northumberland County.
yep.
I'm sorry if you're mad about this. Please tell me, and I'm happy to come hang out at your bookstore. Oh,
Oh,
no, there is a used bookstore in Mount Carmel. I'm sorry. I did try to get in touch with them, but it didn't end up working out. I think they sell more mysteries and paperbacks type. But
okay. Well, now that they're on notice that you have a book and you could sell it
mhm,
there, but I will
mhm.
say, for listeners, viewers out there, the Gratz auction is really great. That's like my childhood there, because I also grew up in a place,
Yeah.
that's like 20 minutes away. Also grew up in a place that was like coal mining on one side of the mountain, and then Pennsylvania Dutch
Mm,
farmers on the other side. And
mhm,
so that's my roots are very much the same there. It's like half of my family's from the Higgins area, and the other half is from Williamstown, Wiccanisco. So yeah, one
mhm,
foot in the mine, the other foot growing potatoes.
mhm.
So, all right, Mitch, gonna have to leave it there for now, but I would love to do this again sometime
Yeah.
soon. But everyone, go out, get yourself a copy of Mitch's book. There'll be information about it down below, and also head out to Gratz where you can pick it up when you're getting your sausage from Troutman's Meats.
Yeah, the library has it as well. I don't make a ton of money. I'm just really happy to get this out there. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks so much, Jake.
excellent. Yeah, thank you.